I think the real shocker was when I first took hold of the car. Both of my parents looked at me as I couldn't even start the car or drive it out of the parking lot. I think at that point I was like, crap, maybe trading the family car for this vintage might have been a bad idea. Hi, I'm Santosh, and let me tell you about my car and my story. I've always been into cars since I was a kid, and as I got older, my passion really turned towards classic vehicles. But in a country like Singapore that's not really car friendly, I thought that such a dream would only exist in the form of toy cars and magazines. It was when my family's car was getting a little problematic where the opportunity first arose. My dad decided to retire from driving, and I was the only one within the family that had a driver's license. I was contemplating whether this would be the right time to dive into a vintage car. After all, we needed a new car. Nobody said the new car can't be old, right? I would mindlessly stroll through SG Carmart or even overseas auctions just for the sake of living that fever dream of owning a classic. That's when I chanced upon a strange advert for a car that was for sale, without a price attached to it. Later on, I got to know the owner, who then agreed to wait for me to save up before selling it to me for a reasonable price. When I got handed over the car, I was elated and yet troubled. Yes, it was my very own first car, and yes, it's a vintage, like what I hoped it to be, but it wouldn't start. And my parents were quick to berate me for the irresponsible decision to trade in the family's old car for this non-running vehicle. There was nothing more daunting than trying to dive into something without having any prior experience beforehand. I realized that I needed to do something with my car, or else it would just be sitting there as junk. From there began the long but interesting challenge of fixing the car from the ground up, with some help from newly made friends around the world. The main trouble was the lack of spares, and workshops that were willing to tackle the car. Now, don't get me wrong, there are a bunch of go-to specialists for vintage cars here in Singapore, but none of them were in my measly budget range. After all, it is an expensive hobby to get into the first place, and I had to look for other sources. At the start, right, I befriended a retired mechanic, and in order to gain his trust, I was an apprentice for him for other jobs. He then helped the car get moving so I can at least use it from time to time. I searched Facebook marketplaces in neighbouring countries for parts, often buying the wrong pin multiple times before ending up with the right part. Mind you, this was all done during the circuit breaker period, and all the borders were closed and shipping was really expensive. I ended up learning the hard way and often wallet-burning way of sourcing out proper suppliers and parts for the car. It was only when the car was about 50% done and 90% of the parts were actually sourced for, the borders to Malaysia actually opened. Hence, I aborted all plans of continuing the build in Singapore and chose to venture up north so that I could find people who would actually do the car to the vision I had for it. The plan was, well, there wasn't one. I found a few workshops through online forums and videos, and I decided to take the bet that at least one of them could solve the problem. I stuffed all the parts into the car and drove it all the way up to Kuala Lumpur overnight with a friend. It was my first time driving overseas, so it was quite hectic and a challenging drive up indeed. Even then, most had trouble sourcing the proper ways to do it back to factory standards. And so I spent many weekends in Malaysia driving to and from to various workshops who might know a guy that'd be able to do it. Eventually, this made me drive all the way up to Penang to meet a specialist who I'm ever so grateful for, as he crafted all the wiring needed to accommodate the period-correct electronics that were going into the car. It was then I was excited to see the vision finally getting the car fully functional. To be honest, going weekend after weekend, traveling 6 to 8 hours just to fix up a car was really tiring. Furthermore, my parents would actually scold me and call me crazy for doing so much for such an old and worthless car. These were times where, on a long ride back to Singapore where I was questioning myself, is it worth it, like doing all of this? What if the car still doesn't turn out right? After a few months, I finally found hope with pictures of my car coming back to me from the workshops that were fixing my car. Each step it took, it was looking better and better. And each time I went back to Malaysia to look at my car, I was more relieved as it drew closer to the final product. Everyone who worked on it was just as impressed and excited of how it was all coming together. And the day when the car was complete, the drive down was just pure bliss. To know that a car is indeed reborn into this completely new vehicle, the feelings you just can't replicate. The end result is what you get, a fully restored Toyota Corolla Wagon, and I've installed all the top of the line factory options with a few extra that came from some of the other premium models. This includes the digital dashboard that you see inside, the air fantasy system that I have, the film monitor, everything that kind of screams space age in the 80s, this car has it. Even the period correct super rare Panasonic copy stereo that I installed on the roof. I'm fairly confident nobody else has a car in such a spec, with all the little details as well. Overall, it was a tiring and expensive journey, but I don't ever regret it. It still is a check in my book that I get to own a vintage car. And hey, it's not something someone does every day.